Hi, everyone. Arena 9, and thank you for joining us. The House is preparing to vote on articles of impeachment one day after condemning President Trump for racist remarks. The articles were brought forth on Tuesday by Texas Democrat Al Green. Congressman Green says that he introduced the impeachment resolution because of the president's racist tweets against 4 congressional women of color. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi addressed the media earlier today. She was asked about Congressman Green's resolution.
For an impeachment, articles of impeachment to succeed, I haven't really actually seen his articles of impeachment, but are they about racism? We'll deal with that resolution on the floor. But as I have said over and over again, with all the respect in the world for Mr. Green, he's a very prayerful person, and he cares very much about our Constitution and our country. So, as I say, with all the respect in the world for him, we have 6 committees that are working on following the facts in terms of any abuse of power, obstruction of justice, and the rest that the president may have engaged in. That is the serious path that we are on. Not that Mr. Green is not serious, but we'll deal with that on the floor.
The impeachment resolution comes one day after the House voted to condemn President Trump's racist rant. The votes were largely along party lines, and every Democrat approved, and only 4 Republicans did. Republican leaders in both the House and the Senate stood by the president on Tuesday. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell both declined to call the president's tweets racist. President Trump has also not backed down from his comments. On Tuesday, he said it's his opinion the 4 Democratic congresswomen hate America. A USA Today poll shows that most Republicans are also standing by the president. Only 25% of Republicans believe that the president's tweets are, quote, un-American. Well, that compares to 88% of Democrats and 59% of Americans as a whole. I want to bring in CBS News political correspondent Ed O'Keefe in Washington. So, Ed, really, what are the options for Nancy Pelosi going ahead? What can we expect?
We can expect there'll be a vote later today, and while she wouldn't commit to what exactly is expected to happen, if what's happened before is any guide, this measure from Congressman Green is likely to be what they call tabled, or essentially shoved aside and sent back to committee. As she pointed out, there are 6 committees that are looking into various aspects of the president, his administration, or his own personal or professional background that could ultimately be fodder for some kind of an immigration movement, but she's not there yet. And I think what she was trying to signal there a little earlier was slow your roll, everybody. If we're going to do this, it's going to happen methodically and not until the fall at the earliest. There are a lot of other pressing matters, frankly, facing Congress in the next week and a half before they try to get out of here for the August recess. And she doesn't really want to divert from that, because while there's all this focus on what happened yesterday, while there's focus on this impeachment vote, which will happen this afternoon, she's trying to sort out with the Treasury Secretary a deal on a potential budget agreement and a plan to raise the debt ceiling. And she doesn't want to screw up those negotiations that really do need to happen here in the next 2 weeks or so.
Explain to us also, Ed, on the debt ceiling. This is sort of an issue that we haven't really had a lot of time on, but you know, why is this so critical at this juncture right now? Why is she pushing this, trying to push this forward?
Well, because the American economy essentially rides on it, Rena, and it has to be done. And if it isn't done by the end of the fiscal year, you're going to see all sorts of economic uncertainty. The hope among everybody in Congress is to try to get it done before the August recess, because when they get back, they've got to focus on a few other must-pass things, or at least find ways to keep kicking the can down the road. And so in order to get that process done by the start of the August recess, it essentially has to be agreed to by the end of this week so that votes can be held next week. The final week of July, only one of the chambers is still around, and so they've just essentially got to get this done now. But beyond that, as you pointed out, and as we've pointed out repeatedly, impeachment is not a popular option right now amongst most Americans. And Pelosi is concerned about preserving her majority and expanding it potentially next year. And she knows, and many other Democrats know, that while they may believe that the president's done a lot of bad things, focusing only on impeachment right now would prove to be unpopular with the voters they're going to need to convince to vote for them again next year.
And when you look at the vote count, only 4 Republicans joined the Democrats to condemn the president's tweets. Our county at CBS was more than 24 who actually condemned the remarks on Twitter or through the press. So when you're talking about the president's grip on the Republican Party, what do you read from this, and what's the White House's take on all this?
It's pretty strong, because if you look at this graphic here, Susan Brooks is retiring. Fred Upton always threatens to retire or run for higher office. Brian Fitzpatrick and Will Hurd are the two most vulnerable House Republicans in elections next year. Fitzpatrick's from a suburban Philadelphia district, and Will Hurd has the district that runs the stretch of the Texas-Mexico border that Democrats always target. And so it's no surprise that some combination of these four would vote the way that they did. There were a handful of others, as you said, about 24 in the House and the Senate who had condemned the president's remarks, but they also understand that crossing the president comes at their political peril. And so the rest of them may have said what they said, but voted the way they did.
I want to play for you Gayle King's interview from CBS this morning with the squad and sort of break some of this down for us.
Are you speaking to Nancy Pelosi?
Our teams are in communication. Our chiefs are.
But shouldn't it be a face-to-face with you and the Speaker,
Yeah.
as opposed to your people and her people?
Right,
Shouldn't it be a
right.
face-to-face?
But you're
to
new members
answer
of
that
Congress.
question?
But no, I'm very protective.
With all due respect, she doesn't need protection.
All right.
I want to know if you were
She's
speaking.
the new member, not the Speaker.
No, but I want
She
to
has
know.
every right to sit down with her in any moment, any time, with any of us.
Yeah.
She is Speaker of the House. She can ask for a meeting to sit down with us for clarification. The fact of the knowledge is, and I've done racial justice work in our country for a long time, acknowledge the fact that we are women of color. So when you do single us out, be aware of that and what you're doing, especially because some of us are getting death threats, because some of us are being singled out in many ways because of our backgrounds, because of our experiences and so forth. But I think
Alexandria,
the
are
question
you interested
should be,
in having a conversation face-to-face
Oh,
with
absolutely.
House Speaker Nancy
Absolutely.
Pelosi?
why wouldn't she sit down with her?
Yeah, no, absolutely, and we've reached out to that end.
Well, if you weren't aware of the divide between House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and the squad, you see it there in that interview. What's the sense moving forward, though, Ed? You know, is Nancy Pelosi concerned about this at all?
We know, according to reports, that there is work underway to make sure that the Speaker and AOC have a meeting soon face-to-face. They have not met together since earlier this year. That's not abnormal. As Pelosi has pointed out, and that's part of what caused this friction, they are but one or four members of a 500 or 435 member body, and Pelosi doesn't necessarily talk to all of them all the time. So there will be some kind of a face-to-face meeting likely soon, because I think this entire experience has reminded Democrats and shown the country now, thanks to the president, that there are some tensions between Democrats about not only policy and ideological aspects of their work, but also some personality and generational and racial concerns that they may want to remind the Speaker about. She comes from an entirely different generation, an entirely different way of doing politics. I've heard from Democratic members of the House who rumble that grumble privately that part of the reason the Speaker may have said what she said and tried to sort of discount the so-called squad is because she doesn't like the fact that there are now other women in Washington, in the House, who are earning as much, if not more, attention and notoriety than she, the only woman ever to serve as Speaker. So that kind of tension's natural, whether it's between women, between men and women, between Democrats and Republicans. That's how Washington works. Guess what? They're all personalities with fragile egos. But we'll see whether the Speaker and AOC meet at some point soon and what the results are of that meeting.
Boy, it's remarkable how Twitter has not just changed the White House, but diplomacy, whether Capitol Hill or abroad in many ways, it's pretty fascinating to see that play out. Ed, I want to ask you about 2020 and the debates. The DNC is expected to tell CNN which Democratic candidates have made the second debate. That's coming in 2 weeks. So we know for a fact Congressman Eric Swalwell is out. He's taken himself out of the running. So are there any new faces that we can expect? What do you think we might see?
We will see at least one new face, Rena, in the debate, depending on how things shake out. And it is likely to be the governor of Montana, Steve Bullock, who had joined the race in May and essentially hadn't been in it long enough to meet the polling and fundraising requirements for the first round, but almost just a few days after that first debate essentially had qualified for the second round. So if you were to swap out Bullock for Swalwell, that may be the only new face. If it's not him, it's not entirely clear. One other person, for example, that has qualified is Mike Gravel, the former Alaska senator who ran back in 2008. But he qualified because he got enough donors. And remember, right now you're in an either-or situation. You meet a donor threshold or you meet a polling threshold. Bullock appears to have met both and has raised more money than Gravel. So that's why he's more likely to take Swalwell's spot than anybody else.
All right, Ed O'Keefe, thank you for joining us, Ed.
Take care.